All right, I guess it's 8 o'clock. Since it's CIP centric, I'll call the meeting to order. Jewel, can you read the statement?
Yes, sir. Good morning, board, staff, and members of the public. After my statement, the chairman will open this meeting and explain the rules for this electronic meeting. Please keep your microphone on mute when you're not speaking. The technical support team may proactively mute participants if the microphone is picking up background noise. Board members should check to make sure the microphone is not muted before speaking. You may text me at 540-336-3948 at any time during the meeting if you need technical support, and an IT tech will call your cell phone to assist. I now turn the meeting over to Mr. Sultan. Mr. Sultan, are you muted, sir?
Jewel, I think Mr. Sultan was having some issues. I know we were hearing a lot of echoing and background noise. So he may be trying to get back in.
Can you hear me?
I say the finance chairman needs to take over.
Yes, I think so. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. There's a lot of background.
Yeah, let Terry read the takeover. I'm having some computer problems.
All right, thank you.
All right, no problem. In accordance with the governor's state of emergency declaration and executive orders regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, the Loudoun County Board of Supervisors continuing ordinance and the General Assembly 2020 budget amendments 28 and 137. Loudoun Water will meet today in an electronic meeting. In compliance with these special procedures, only action items necessary to continue operations of Loudoun Water and the discharge of its lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities will be discussed during today's meeting. Reports and other information are available on board docs. Public notice and meeting access information was provided on the Loudoun Water website. A recording of the meeting will be available in board docs at the following link, which I'm not going to read because it's on the website. Board members wishing to speak are reminded to press unmute and identify themselves by name so staff can accurately capture comments. All action items will be recorded to the December 10th, 2020 board meeting. The board secretary will now take a roll call attendance of the committee members.
Thank you. Mr. Sultan?
Here.
Mr. Allen?
Here.
Mr. Bonfils?
Present.
Byers?
Here.
Mr. Campbell?
Here.
Mr. Kelly?
Here.
Mr. Moody?
Here.
Ms. Sursakar?
Here.
Thank you. And I'd like to also acknowledge that Chairman Koblis is in attendance. Thank you.
Terry, I can take over the CIP centric from here if you don't mind.
Okay, sounds good.
Or you can do it, either one, I can do it. Next thing is to approve the meeting agenda. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
Motion to approve. Yeah, motion to approve.
Second?
I'll second.
Susan.
A roll call, Jill?
All right, I have Mr. Moody making the motion, Mr. Kelly seconding, and Mr. Allen?
Yes.
Thank you. Mr. Bonfils?
Yes.
Mr. Byers?
Yes.
Mr. Campbell?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Moody?
Yes.
Ms. Sursakar?
Yes.
And Mr. Sultan?
Yes.
Unanimous. Thank you, sir.
Okay, let's go on to the next item, the action items.
None.
Presentation.
Good morning, members of the board, and to the GMO and other folks that are in the meeting today. We're here today to review the 10-year CIP for Loudoun Water, and then also the first year of that 10-year plan, which we refer to as the capital spending plan, the 2021 capital spending plan. Let me see if I can get. Yep, there we go. Okay, so the presentation that we have for you today is very similar to the presentation we've been using for the last several years. And that's because our planning process hasn't really changed much over the last several years. And really, I think we'll see as we go through this that the results of our planning process are really pretty consistent. And so in the world of planning, and especially in capital project planning, those are all really positive attributes to the process, and really it's a good place to be, to have pretty consistent planning. I'm mindful that many of you as board members have seen this style of presentation before. We do have a few new board members that have not seen that before. So I'm going to try to balance not going into too much detail, but also trying to provide enough information to familiarize with the new members of the process that we go through. Today is really an informational presentation for you all. You're not being asked to take any kind of action today. We're just going to review the 10-year CIP and then the capital spending plan. That capital spending plan will be something that, along with the operating budget that was already previously reviewed by the Finance Committee, that you'll be asked to take action on those two items together at your next board meeting. So again, no action being requested of you all today, really just informational. So with that in mind, of course, and I know we say it all the time, but if you have questions as I'm going through this process or these slides, feel free to just chime in. We always start with just kind of a little bit of a look of a map of our overall central system, although our 10-year CIP really does also include all our community systems and things beyond just the water and sewer systems here in the map. It is a nice kind of just benchmark of seeing how big our system is. This is what takes up the vast majority of the CIP, is our central water and sewer. Blue lines represent water, green lines represent sewer, and you'll notice here sort of on the 2020 map, at the northern edge of the map, we have shown here the P1, P2 area that we picked up as new service area as a result of the county's change in the comprehensive plan. And then just another click is to be mindful that the JLMA, this area here, we've been talking about this off and on over the last year, but that is also now starting to have some impacts in our 10-year planning for our CIP as we think about what service to those areas will look like. So, and we'll talk about some of those in some of the future slides. And then this is also just something that we developed, sort of a little bit of a heat map based off of the county's projections of where growth is projected. The county hasn't really updated these projections in the last several years, so this map hasn't really changed much, but you can see the large concentrations of growth are still around the metro areas, the airport, the area just west to the airport, the growth around Arcola, and then up in the northern area around the Dulles Town Center and One Loudoun as well. And you do see now we're probably a little bit more sensitive to the dots that are up there in the JLMA area, just a little bit below Leesburg there at the top. So so that's the growth projections, and those are currently being worked on at the county, and I think in 2021 we're going to have some update to that, although I'm not sure it'll look much different. You know, as we talk about the process we go through, here we are in mid-November. This is really the result of bringing forward our CIP, is really a result of about 3 months worth of planning that we do. We do have a pretty structured process that we go through. It is pretty programmatic. The result of the planning that we do in identifying projects is really what you see, the example on the right-hand side. We create a project summary sheet for every one of our projects. It has some of the basic information about the project. At the top, it has information about the project name and a project number for it. It has brief descriptions of what the project is and what the project drivers are. Over here on the right-hand side below the map, we do some scoring for our projects to try to prioritize those and help us understand which projects are more urgent or more important than others. And then across the bottom of the sheet, we schedule out the expected capital spending over a 10-year period, and then to help us in preparing that capital spending plan for the first year, the very bottom of the sheet kind of comes up with a monthly spending plan for that first year. So we have some tools that we've developed to use to try to keep this, the assumptions in how we budget projects and how we schedule them. We've tried to create some consistency as best as we can so that like projects are getting like considerations. And I think that has helped as we've refined those processes over the year. It's really helped us be much more consistent in our planning and then more consistent in the results that we're getting. I would also mention that the monies that we do schedule out here are for project spending. It's external money. It does not include internal Loudon Water staff time. The staff time and the cost associated with our internal labor is actually carried in a different line item within the CIP. And I'll try to remember to point that out later on. It's carried in the financial program, not carried in each individual project. So a little bit about the process that we go through. In late August, we actually start the process of our CIP development. And you can see on the right-hand side here that there were about 40 to 50 staff members involved in creating all of the project sheets. That's fairly typical of the size of the group that's involved in doing our capital planning. The projects are put project sheets, project summaries are created for every project. This year we had about 190 of those pulled together, and that's the effort that's done in the month of September. So there's about a month, maybe to 5 or 6 weeks involved in there while project sheets are pulled together, and that's the result of actually continuous ongoing planning that happens as the years go along. People are identifying potential needs. And I'll also mention at this point that as we pull together the project sheets, we review every project. So if it was in the previous 10-year CIP, we spend time re-looking at it. Do we still believe that the scoring that was used last year is still relevant? Are the drivers the same? Is the project needs the same? Is the proposed spending the same? So we do look at every project every year, and that's why you see that there were about 190 projects developed by the end of September. And then the first few weeks of October are spent actually taking all those individual projects and trying to pull them into one consistent story. It's all done into a database where we start looking at the projects not as individual projects, but we start looking at them a little bit more together, looking at them with respect to the programs. The directors are involved in reviewing all of those projects at this level and trying to make sure as we get into the next steps that we've done some quality control. You can see here that as we got through those steps, some of the projects, we got to about 183 projects through that process, and we had identified that 37 of those 183 projects this year were new projects that were not previously in the CIP. The next step after we've pulled together this one story and developed this database of projects is that we get together as an organization. We have what we call a CIP review team. It's sort of a steering committee. It has about 15 or so members. It seems every year we add another staff to it. It's largely made up of directors and key managers. And some other key planning staff that we start to talk about this large plan that we've put together, these 183 projects, and we start to think about them across the organization as a whole. We're looking and comparing maybe perhaps rankings and scorings to see if projects from different departments seem to make sense. And we're really getting now into starting to kind of scrutinize the projects that we think and the funding that we're showing that we believe is necessary for the projects. After we get through that first initial meeting, we then actually come back a few more times in October this year. It was just about 2 or 3 weeks ago where we got back together a few times at that same group, and we really started looking a little bit more at the labor and resources that we need to execute these projects. And when we're looking at the personnel and labor needs, we're a little bit more focused on the 2021 this year. We may spend a little bit of time thinking about the labor needs over the next couple of years, but our main focus is for the projects that we're planning on taking on in 2021. Do we have both the ability to fund those projects and then actually to have the staff necessary to execute those projects? And then once we get through that, we sit down with the general manager. We sat down with Carla and Roddy and Mark. I think it was just early last week. We reviewed the plan. We also include finance and Brian Carnes in a little bit of that discussion as well. And then we bring the plan forward for you all here today. So maybe before I step on into starting to look at the plan, just a quick check to see if anybody had any questions on the process that we go through. Okay.
Mr. Kelly has a question.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Tom. Good morning. It's John
Good morning.
Kelly. I may have missed it, but how are new projects? I mean, I see on the sheet here, projects submitted. How does where do they come from? How does it get into the planning process and accepted as a project?
Sure, that's a great question. The sources of, I guess, of project could be many. It could be something pretty formalized. It could be a master plan that we were working on. For example, we've recently been master planning what utilities would be needed for the JLMA and the new TPA area. The results of that study identified water and sewer infrastructure that was going to be needed. So in that case, you have a pretty formalized assessment, and we would then take that information and turn that into projects. And I'll touch on those specific projects about the JLMA area a little bit further on in the presentation. We have an asset management program, which is looking at the existing infrastructure that we have and making recommendations on when things need renewed and replaced. And so that may be a driver. There may be information coming out of that system that's saying, hey, here's a new need that we didn't identify previously. Let's create a project for it. And then it also could be conditions that are observed in the field that we might identify something that is in, kind of an urgent need of replacement. And then it can be other miscellaneous kind of items that come up along the way. But the sources can be many, but I hope that answers your question. If not, please feel free to.
Yeah, no, it does. Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, okay, you're welcome.
Tom, Mr. Moody has a question.
Yes.
Yes, hi, Tom.
Good
You
morning.
mentioned that there's criteria to evaluate the projects. I was just curious, are the criteria treated equally, or are there certain weights associated with the criteria?
Yeah, I'm going to pop back a few slides to show you those criteria. The answer is they're not all treated equally. I don't think we show the weighting on this. You can see on the left-hand side the prioritization criteria, and there's 5 of them. I do recall that the bottom one, funding or other opportunities, is one of the lowest weighted ones because we rarely do have other opportunities of funding for our projects. So to put too much weight on that, it wouldn't be a very useful use of the other 4 categories or the other 4 criteria. But the other ones are not set as equal, but honestly, I don't recall. But I can follow up if you'd like to see what the actual weighting of those are.
Okay, yeah, I was just curious. Thank you.
Okay, sure.
Mr. Sultan has a question.
On the very low end, the projects with the very lowest priority, do you have many projects that hang around from year to year and never get upgraded, or do they automatically get upgraded?
You know, the answer is many do hang around, and we try to rescore them every year. So one of those criteria was level of service. Sometimes as a project hangs around, all of a sudden the risk associated with not moving that project forward creates, a greater sort of risk, if you will, on our ability to provide that service, whether it's water, sewer, or reclaim. So by rescoring them every year, sometimes those projects do start to increase their score, and our system was set up to try to accommodate that. But our scoring system isn't infallible. It's trying to take all the needs across an entire organization, whether those are water, sewer, whether they're IT needs, whether it might be something that we're trying to do education-wise. So the criteria aren't perfect, and we are mindful of projects that are hanging around, and we try to understand, are they, is there a desire to want to move those forward? And that's part of the process that this entire CIP team looks at as we review all those projects together is, maybe a score isn't representative of a project's need, and let's make sure we're getting working on it if it's been out there for a while. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Great questions. Okay, so if there's no more on that, then we'll look at real quick here just some summary numbers for the 10-year CIP. 183 projects in the 10 years, and about 127 of those are proposed for next year, for 2021, that we would be working on. As we mentioned, that was about 37 new projects identified. If we look back at the 10-year plan last year, there were 163 projects in the 10-year plan, and that next number is actually a typo. I tried to fix a typo, and I think I created another one when I did it. It was 111 projects that we were working on in 2020, not 11 projects. So the plan is a little bit larger than it was last year in quantity, 183 instead of 163. And so this is a graphic representation of the spending associated with those 183 projects. You can see that we create programs. I think we have 8 different programs that are shown down below in the legend, and then the spending is shown color-coded to those programs. One thing that we always have is at the bottom, basically the foundation of our CIP is this category, this financial category, which always spends around $20 to $30 million a year. And I have a table later on showing what the programs are, the projects that are within that program. But it is things like debt, that internal Loudon Water capital labor is in this column, and then payments to our wholesale partner utilities such as DC Water and Fairfax and UOSA. Those are all carried in there, and they really kind of seem to add up to about $20 to $30 million a year. There's also some reimbursement to development community in there. You see, the water program and the wastewater program. You see at the top here, you see the Broad Run, and in blue is our Potomac Water Supply Program. And I'll kind of focus on those again a little bit more on the next slide. But in addition to, and I should have mentioned on the previous slide that the 10-year plan is at $957 million. One thing that we've talked about, we recently were talking about the Howardsville project with the county and the Broad Run Farms water main project. In this 10-year plan, you'll see that there's spending, which on the right-hand side is shown to be reimbursed by the county. And in the 10-year plan here, I believe that it amounts to about $40 million it's shown. We have it kind of distributed throughout the 10 years based on when we think the projects would likely go forward. We include it in our 10-year forecast of spending from a cash flow standpoint so that we know when we might need to spend the money. The way we would get reimbursed back from the county on these projects has varied over time. Sometimes it has been a direct reimbursement from the county in a pretty timely manner right after the work was completed. And sometimes the payback from the county has been something as part of an agreement and paid back over time. So of this $957 million, about $40 million of that would be money that would be reimbursed by the county. The next slide kind of gives you sort of the look back to what the 10-year CIP looked like when we put it together last year. So I mentioned we are at $957 million for the current 10 years. When we put this together last year, that 10-year window was just shy of $800 million. And so you can see the white bars represent last year's forecast. And you see that there's some shifting of the bars in the first 5-year window if we look at 2021 through 2025. But overall, there's a little bit of give and take on these, and you're not seeing a big change in the overall spending in the first 5 years. But you're seeing some years where the forecast now is a little lower and it's being picked up in other years. And that's really just representative of a few major projects and updating some schedules of when we believe those projects are going to be executed. So I'll mention here at this point that this really large set of spending here shown in this brownish orange color, this is the current expansion of Broad Run that we just got started and that you approved for construction earlier in the year. This is that about $80 million project spread out over the course of the next 4 years. And then you also see here in this darker blue color, which represents the Potomac Water Supply Program, this is the Quarry A project. So this is that project moving forward into construction over the next several years. And you can see that if you look at the rest of the spending and you kind of disregard that Quarry A and the Broad Run spending, you see that this is relatively flattened out. So those two projects that are really going to be dominating the capital spending over the next several years. The other thing that we've talked about was the changes recently to the county's comprehensive plan and that additional service area in the TPA and then the JLMA. And this is the first year that we've pulled together the CIP and that we've really started to show some impacts for what we think financial costs could be to build infrastructure to serve both the TPA and the JLMA. And you're going to see those show up as the water infrastructure. It's showing up here in this blue bar that is the water, and then this other green color that is associated with the sewer. You're starting to see the distribution of that in this time frame. There's other projects in the water and sewer. It's not just fully the JLMA and TPA, but I think the way that we distributed based off what we would anticipate development coming and spending needs be is that there's $40 million in total for the water and sewer for the JLMA TPA, and there's about half of it in the first 5 years, and then about another half of it right now is shown in the second 5 years. And we will continue as we understand the spending a little bit better, as we understand the timing a little bit better. We'll continue to massage that in the CIP planning and look at it again, probably maybe with respect to certainly as we get to this point next year, and maybe even a little bit in our mid-year review later in 2021, in the mid-time of 2021. So again, before I move on and continue on, I'll take a pause and see if anybody has any questions about the overall 10-year spending and a little bit about how it looked this year compared to last year.
Tom, I see no questions.
Okay, there's one thing I should have mentioned, and that's on the tail end here. You see the next phase of Trap Rock. So we have this expansion to take us out to the annual average of 15 MGD or a monthly average of 16.5 MGD. I'm sorry?
You said Trap Rock, and I was.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Broad Run. Thank you, Roddy. You see that current construction project here, and then you're starting to see another expansion of Broad Run start to come in on the backside of the 10-year window. So. Okay, so just looking a little bit at how the 10-year plan has changed over the first 5 years. This is something that we talked a little bit with the finance group on, and I believe it will be something that will be in the first quarter or so as the 5-year plan of finance gets looked at again in 2021. A comparison to see that over the course of last year's 10-year plan and this year's 10-year plan, there really isn't a large change in the 5-year window. These years of 2021 through 2024 are fairly consistent. And then the addition of the $92 million on the back end is kind of replacing what was a $73 million on the front end in previously. So the difference between those is about, from 540 to 546, almost an identical forecast. And then when you take out some of the anticipated spending with county projects in that time frame, you see that the numbers are slightly different, but still pretty similar. And again, if you guys have any questions, please just chime in. So that was the 10-year plan. The first year, $89 million is our forecasted spending for the first year. We refer to that as the capital spending plan. And when you get together in December at the board meeting to approve the budget, this is the portion that you'll be being asked to approve is the $89 million for capital spending for next year. Again, that is 827 projects. So a little bit about looking at that and trying to break down that that $89 million. This is kind of looking at those 8 programs and where that money is distributed. So it's really that bar just shown now in a pie chart with some numbers put to it. The finance program, as we said, always kind of around $20 to $30 million. For next year, it's right there. The Broad Run expansion is estimated to spend just a little over $30 million next year. Those make up the large amount of spending for the 2021 capital spending plan. There are some, distribution of projects here through the water and the wastewater, a little bit on the Potomac water supply for some spending out at Trap Rock, and some of that is some of the Core EA spending as we're moving through the CMAR, construction manager at risk procurement process.
Mr. Koblis has a question.
Yes, sir.
Thanks, Jewel. As far as timing of this CIP, did you factor in the COVID issues that we have? I mean, we certainly are not getting very many ERCs, and has that factored in this at all, or will that happen next year?
I think largely the projects that we have kind of going on in construction right now, the expansion that we need for the Broad Run, maybe the need for it or the timing for it might be impacted by the COVID, but we certainly need that expansion. And if the growth slows down a little bit, it probably just buys us a little bit of buffer on the back end, which we would welcome. So the Broad Run project, and of course with that already being out as a construction project, wasn't affected by that. We don't have too many other projects in construction this year that are just starting, so a lot of them are continuing on. So there wasn't really a lot of opportunity to slow those down, and I'm not sure that they would have been impacted by anything COVID, but I don't think there's a large impact yet, and maybe next year there will be, but we do have a fair amount of projects going through the design process this year, and there will be an opportunity, I think, Mark, as we complete the design to decide whether or not the driver is still as urgent to put it out to construction right away. So that might be one of the ways that we would be looking at that impact.
And
okay,
Tom,
thanks.
if I could just add, I think, Mr. Koblis, what will happen is once you approve the budget in December, we're going to incorporate this 10-year plan into our 5-year plan of finance, along with the approved operating budget. And where you may see the difference is in what we have to borrow in around 2023. that's directly impacted by ERC. So while some of these projects have to move forward, that's where you'll see the difference when we update the plan.
Thank you, Carla. Was that good, Mark? Was there any other follow-up question for that?
No, that's perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Sultan has a question, Tom.
Just under the administrative and facilities, what kind of projects are in that category?
All the projects that don't fit neatly into one of the other categories in some way, to be honest with you.
So that's the et cetera category.
It is kind of the miscellaneous category. I'm trying to see if I can think offhand of what some of those projects might be. Things like SAP and some of those more organizational wide projects, vehicles, projects around facilities, like if there was a large amount of work going on at the Ashburn campus, and those style of projects.
Tom, those include the Ashburn O&M building as well, the storage
Thank you,
building.
Brian. Yeah.
Ah, okay. Okay, thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you, Brian. So that's the look at it by sort of the spending by program. And then also we look at that same $89 million based on what phase of the project or what style of spending might be needed. So again, you see about 43 million, almost half of the money of that 89 million is going towards projects that are under construction. And then a third of it going towards the finance projects. And then sort of the remainder, less than 25% of it on some projects that are in the design and some planning. And then again, some of the projects where there's the purchasing of equipment that is being capitalized for the facilities, as well as things like that were mentioned, which was, IT upgrades and SCADA systems and SAP and other programs like that. So this helps us really kind of understand that we feel pretty confident that the finance spending and the under construction spending, if it isn't going to get spent in 2021 because of some potential schedule delays, it's certain that we're going to be spending that money. And I think our success has been probably on the under construction and the finance, probably in the 80 to 90% of that is getting spent. So the other projects, perhaps whether they're in design or in planning, they're lower dollar values, but they're more susceptible to maybe a slowdown in schedule because of the nature of the work and the uncertainty maybe in what's being worked on in those phases. So, and then this is a result of the labor analysis, sort of the resourcing analysis that we do as we go through the CIP, and we focus on if we have $89 million needed for next year, can we spend it? And this analysis is probably one of the larger contributors to determining how much capital can we spend next year. I don't recall the number of the 89 million. Before we got through this resource analysis, it was a higher value. And then after we were able to look and see how many projects can we really take on, we had to defer some projects, and some of those projects, kind of going back to the question that Mr. Sultan asked earlier, some of those projects are the lower priority projects that we thought maybe we'd be able to get to next year. We would push those out a little bit because we don't have the resources to accommodate them. And there's an analysis there that if there are a lot of urgent projects, then we would be looking at, well, should we be adding more resources to accomplish more projects? But this is the result of that analysis. And you can see by the different divisions of staff at Loud and Water as we try to estimate the number of projects. And you can see by far that engineering, design, construction, and planning really carry the lion's share. And this is the charge of those programs, which is to work on capital projects. So there's no surprise that they are the largest involved in capital projects. And then continuing on and looking at the capital spending plan, this is looking at breaking down the drivers of based on cost for next year's spending into these, I guess we have 6 categories here. You see growth on the bottom left obviously dominates next year's spending, and that is largely with the broad run spending and the finance programs. You see at the top right some asset renewal and replacement. We kind of refer to those as R&R projects, renewal and replacement projects. That is slowly growing every year as our system is aging. And then you see some other miscellaneous smaller categories that are impacting the spending. So when you look at it on cost, you can see it's dominated by growth. If you just look at the number of projects that we have, you actually see that there's a lot of projects that are being worked on that R&R, asset renewal and replacement, is the driver for them, but they just don't carry quite the weight when it comes to the funding for those. So just 2 different ways to look at next year's anticipated spending. And then this would be the top 10, I guess, based on cost for next year. And I don't think you'll be surprised by many of the projects that you see at the very top there. The expansion of Broad Run, the Goose Creek pipe crossing across the reservoir to get the reservoirs connected over to Trap Rock. That was a construction project also that you approved earlier this year. And then the Howardsville construction of the wastewater collection system for Howardsville, which is currently out to bid and will be coming to the board early next year for approval. This is just another look at the 10-year. I'm going to switch back now out of the capital spending plan and just look at the 10-year plan, and kind of close to wrapping up the presentation. These are the kind of few final slides, but this is in that 10-year where you're seeing the top 10 projects. Sorry. And again, Broad Run and Quarry A or Milestone Reservoir, those projects being pretty prominent in the 10 years. And then here is that finance program, and also in the 10 years, you can see that it makes up about $250 million or so, roughly around $250 million out of that $950 million is in that finance program. And this is spending that right now, as we go through the 10-year CIP and execute it, these don't require much in terms of labor resources because these are largely payments to neighboring jurisdictions. But I will mention, I believe on here, yes, this project, Financial 5, this is the capital projects. It's referred to construction in process, but this is the internal Loudon Water capitalized labor. So for 2021, we have about $4 million projected as our internal labor costs to execute all of that $89 million in projects. And then you can just see what that looks like on the 10 years. So I think this is the final slide, and this is actually sort of just jumping back to the capital spending plan. And it's kind of a good way to just close out when you get together again in December, $89 million right now is the proposed budget for next year. And then this is just a comparison of what that's looked like in past years. And I think that is the final slide. And so maybe I'll leave that one up. And if there's any final closing questions, I'm going to close a blind here because I'm getting some sunshine in my eye.
Tom, Mr. Koblis has a question. When you get back to your office.
There we go.
Mr. Koblis?
Yes, Tom, I saw a bunch of money for vehicles. I remember a few years ago that we were going to try to start buying alternative energy type of vehicles. And I just wanted to know if that was in the plan. I guess alternative fuel, not alternative energy, but I was wondering if that's in the planning or we'll just continue to buy gasoline vehicles.
Tom, I'll jump in and help you with
There you
that. I know going back some years, I think it was about 4 or 5 years ago when we had the last fleet study, there was some discussion about natural gas and the possibility of using that. I think based on what they had found in that study, it was not feasible for us, but possibly a joint venture. I know the schools in county had considered that, but it was not feasible at that time for us. We've not gone to any type of alternative fuel or electric vehicles at this point, but certainly something we can consider in the future.
Yeah, the whole natural gas thing. I remember that. That's not something I was really predicting, but we should be buying all electric vehicles. I mean, 2030 is coming up, and everybody wants all electric vehicles by then. Of course, I personally am not driving an all electric vehicle, so I should be the one to talk. But it just seems like something that as an organization we should start looking at. And my second hot button that most of you know is getting rid of all the paper in our administration office. And I just want to make sure that there's some kind of plan to do that and to start taking our old prints and putting them on. I think we're starting to do that, and demanding that every single contractor provides us stuff that's electronic and not paper. We can save about 25% of our area of our building if we got rid of all those paper files. I just want to make sure that that's a plan that's moving forward.
I think I'll share back with you, and maybe others can chime in, perhaps maybe Carla, but by necessity, we've been doing that. And, we have for a long time converted all of our, any paper plans that we have in the office, legacy plans, have had all those scanned in, and we almost exclusively use PDFs for that. And we do have the process now in place for the development community to submit all of their plans to us electronically. I don't think we've imposed the requirement yet for it, but we have that system up and running, and I think many of them are taking advantage of it. So I believe in a lot of ways we have already begun to phase out a lot of the paper, and here within the last 9 months or so, it's been by necessity. So
yeah, I don't think there's any reason we can't demand next week that they start providing electronic copies instead of paper. I mean, that's all over Fairfax County, DC, everything now is doing that. There's no reason why we shouldn't. And also, everybody can get rid of all their books and papers and everything off their desk because everything's online too. So that would save considerable space, especially when we start talking about planning to change what we've done.
Agreed. Thank you.
well, that's the end of the presentation. If there's, I don't know, Mr. Sultan, it looks like you might have a question.
Not a question, but I think that was a very good presentation. Thanks.
You're welcome, and thank you.
Yeah, Tom, I'll add in on that. I've been in your shoes many times where I'm presenting budgets, and you've just done a great job. And so thank you for all the work you and everybody else did to put this together. You did a great job. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a great opportunity there for me to say something. I happen to be the one here presenting this to you, but this is the result of, as I mentioned, 50 people and probably even more than that, and they're the ones that deserve all the credit. And then also, especially to Darren Gelder, Darren is the one that's championing this, and the amount of time, energy, effort, and organization he puts together through on this is the only way that doing a presentation like this is possible. So I appreciate those kind comments, and really credit goes to folks more than me. So.
Well, great job, everyone. Thank you for this.
Yeah. Well, I believe that's the only item, so.
Where's the agenda? Jewel, the agenda?
Yes, sir. Michael's bringing it up now, but the only thing left is the date and time of next meeting and adjourn the meeting.
By the way, I apologize for the confusion at the beginning of the meeting. I'm having some computer troubles here and it's going on and off. So that's what caused that trouble. Thanks for Terry to jump in.
I think at this point, just to make sure everyone's clear with the process going forward, we will take this capital plan, incorporate it into the overall budget document, and that will come to you in December for approval of the 2021 budget. So you will act on it at that time. And it may be too early to set your next meeting date. We can coordinate that with you, Mr. Sultan. I mean, we're on a pretty regular schedule, but that meeting wouldn't take place until January.
Yeah.
Hopefully soon after that, we'll have some real meetings, not virtual meetings.
I hope so.
Definitely hope so.
So I think if there are no final questions, Mr. Sultan, you could ask for a motion to adjourn, or we can answer any other questions that might be lingering out there.
Are there any other questions? Okay, can I have a motion to adjourn?
Well moved.
A second?
Second.
Jewel, roll
Jim Bonfield,
call.
second.
Okay, yes, sir. I have Mr. Allen as the motion and Mr. Bonfils second. And now the roll call vote. Mr. Allen,
Yes.
Mr. Bonfils,
Yes.
Mr. Byers,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell,
Yes.
Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kelly, Mr. Moody,
Yes.
Ms. Ursakar,
Yes.
and Mr. Sultan.
Yes.
Thank you, sir. The meeting adjourned at 8:53 a.m. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy Thanksgiving,
Joel.
Happy Thanksgiving.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Good travels if you're traveling.